Fourth session of the day, ladies and gentlemen, conversation on the future of fintech. Another important digital disruption that's underway and going to change probably the way we all live. Let me invite onto the stage Nadeem Hussain, who's the founder of Planet N Group of Companies. Tugral Turab Ali is EVP and head of branchless banking at Finca Microfinance Bank. And they'll be chatting amongst themselves about the future of fintech and banking. Please, over to you.
I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, I think now you can. It's a pleasure for me to share the stage with one of the pioneers of the industry that I'm now working with. Nadeem Hussain Saab needs no introduction. The first time I met him, he was the CEO and president of Tamir Microfinance Bank, which really made the early inroads into mobile money in Pakistan, launched branchless banking. I was at that time with Telenor. And since then, Nadeem Saab has gone on to achieve even greater heights with the Planet N group of companies that he now heads. So Nadeem Saab, if you could start by maybe perhaps talking a little bit about how you see the fintech revolution now taking place. Because at the time that we really were working together, that was, those were very early days in Pakistan, and we had USSD technology really, and it was very much an MNO-led model. Things have changed a lot since then, and I wonder how you see the industry now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Before I get into that, Tugral, I think it's important to understand what the current situation in Pakistan is of the players who can potentially act in fintech, what the landscape looks like. So obviously, fintech is a function of largely disintermediating existing commercial banks unless they decide to do so themselves. Now, so as far as fintech players are concerned, you know, they're in a great place to be because having worked 27 years in the commercial bank industry, and with all, you know, due respect to my friends and colleagues working in the commercial banks, they are what I call lazy lenders. 70% of commercial banks lending is to the government through PIBs and Pakistan Treasury bonds. And in a recent article, I was harsh on them. I actually said they haven't invented anything since the earth cooled. So maybe that might be a bit harsh, but it's the reality in the sense that I don't see commercial banks actually playing a huge role in the fintech development in Pakistan, unfortunately, because they have a great customer base, they have a great brand, they have great distribution. But their thought process is such that they are drunk, unfortunately, on this government treasury spread that's still available, and as a consequence are not hungry. How could a small microfinance bank teaming up with a large telco create the second largest branchless deployment in the world while large commercial bank existed, had a large customer base, had the payment stream, but didn't do so? So from that perspective, I think most fintechs can play a role, and the danger is not commercial banks. My sense is commercial banks will probably buy them. So, you know, if you create one of the 4 pillars that I look at, whether it's nano credit, whether it's payments, whether it's, you know, insurance or wealth management, most likely a large commercial bank will end up purchasing you because they're not doing this themselves. I mean, I've been to 5 of the largest commercial banks, well, okay, 4, and I've done a session with them just to understand, you know, what their digital strategy is. You know, again, I don't want to be harsh, but I didn't see a cohesive digital strategy from the CEOs and the top management of these banks, which means, again, fintechs have a huge role to play. Keep into mind also that Pakistan has huge financial exclusion. On the lending side, the total number of people that the commercial banks lend to in a country of 200 million people is 1.8 million people. 1.8 million people is the total extent of commercial bank lending to credit cards, autos, mortgages, you know, and personal loans. Total number of merchants in Pakistan is 35,000, where you can get a debit card or a credit card accepted. Total number of brokerage accounts in Pakistan is 250,000. Total number of normal bank accounts minus mobile wallets, unique, are probably around 25 million. So, this huge opportunity for the customer base which is outside the banking net, whether it's for nano credit, microfinance, payments, e-health, e-insurance, all those opportunities exist. But obviously you need to scale. And there are clearly challenges related to, I gave a recent talk at Sharm el-Sheikh, and there were 100 central bankers, and I was talking about the impact regulation has on scale. And I was talking about the microfinance story in Pakistan. When the microfinance regulation specifically came in Pakistan, 8 microfinance banks got created. The microfinance regulation allowed banks to be created at $10 million versus $100 million for commercial bank. Then the branchless banking regulation came in, and that created, again, an impetus for the number of mobile wallets and OTC transactions to increase. EIU ranks Pakistan as number 3 in terms of regulation globally. So I think the State Bank and PTA did a great job there. But on the flip side, a $2 million minimum capital requirement for a payment service provider, payment service company, I think is too high, and it's choking innovation or young startups from getting into this market. So regulation, we have many good things happening for us. We always criticize ourselves. But I'll tell you some of the groundwork that's been done in Pakistan, which makes fintech from an enabling environment, I think one of the best in the world, and notwithstanding the challenges. People don't realize, what the value of Nadra is, or the fact that every phone card person who has a SIM card has been biometrically verified, or the fact that this information is available real-time online. Half your digital identity issues are already done. You can right now verify practically anybody on the phone through Nadra biometrically. Most countries don't even have a universal identifier, let alone real-time online access to the national database, that too biometrically verified. What does that mean? It means, from a fintech perspective, in Pakistan we have the 1-minute account. How many countries have a 1-minute account? You can send an SMS to at least 4 institutions. Based on that, central bank allows those institutions to open a level 0 account, which is about 50,000 rupees of transactions in a month. This is old. This is about 5 years old. But I've been to Egypt, I've been to India, I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Sri Lanka, I've been to the Middle East. I haven't seen a 1-minute account. So what I'm saying is we've got a lot of the ingredients are there, but we have challenges, and I'll talk more about that. So long-winded answer to your initial question.
No, I think you covered a lot of very key points. Thank you very much for that. I represent Finca, and I'm looking after branchless banking, and much of what you've said just hits home. I think it's the smaller size of our bank, in fact, that helps us be nimble and agile at this point. We went in for a rather unique arrangement where we partnered with a fintech, and we, in fact, co-located the branchless banking team with the fintech. So we moved my team essentially out of the bank and sitting quite separately with them. And we came up with this product called SimSim. And if you look on your tables, there's a QR code over there. And if you scan and download SimSim, install it, and scan that QR code, you can enter into a lucky draw that will happen around 3:15 at the end of this talk. And you can win an Apple Watch. But that's besides the point. I think what Nadeem Saab alluded to is one of the interesting challenges that we also face, and I would really like for him to shed more light on this. As a small guy, as a small player, you go up against some of the biggest names in the industry. And all you've really got on your side is innovation and speed. And those are really the 2 key ingredients that are going to help you compete with some of the big names in the market. Nadeem Saab, coming back, how would you, if you were in my shoes today, how would you go about capturing this market with all that potential?
Let me just back up a little bit more. When we're talking about fintechs, one of the things that's important for us as a country to have a national digital policy. The absence of a national digital policy is one of the impediments for the growth that we are looking into a fintech. For example, what's the policy, and I haven't seen it, which is going to get us to 90 or 95% 3G, 4G coverage, not through just towers, but optic fibers in part of the countries that we don't have access to. We have the lowest upload and download speed in South Asia. We have the most expensive tariff in South Asia. We have taxes on data. I mean, if you want to have this digital economy, so I'm going beyond just the fintech piece, if you want to have digital Pakistan, the government needs to take a view. I mean, is it broadband for all? And if it's broadband for all, how expensive is that broadband? Why are there taxes on data? Why are there taxes on smartphones under 10,000 rupees? They ought to be free because that instrument is not a phone. Now it's a bank, it's a hospital, it's a school, it's an entertainment center. So what I'm saying is that fintechs is a small sliver of this huge digital Pakistan policy, and we as practitioners ought to be interacting and making sure that this thing, because we are very happy with what we've achieved. I talked about the 1-minute account. But if you look at the Huawei Global Connectivity Index of 50 countries, which represent around 70% of the population and 90% of the world's GDP, we are number 50 out of 50. If you look at innovation, we are 48 out of 50. If you look at technology developments, in that context, we're sort of sitting around 47, 48. So we're the last 4 in everything on a global basis. So while we are happy about the small wins we've had, unless we have a holistic theme, whether it's the creation of data centers, whether it's the creation or fully optimization use of data analytics, whether it's Internet of Things being propagated, we're never going to get higher up on that scale. But coming back to your question, we look at fintech apps day in, day out. We get pitched by people. I look at 50 pitches a month. And people are coming up with very innovative ideas, which are obviously some are fintech, some are non-fintech. For example, what am I seeing in the next 2 to 3 years? I think by the first quarter of next year, if not earlier, you will have a 1-minute loan. A loan available, a nano credit loan, maybe between 1 to 10,000 rupees, based on either the data in your smartphone or based on your SIM data and your mobile wallet data. And the loan is without any paperwork. You download the app goes into your phone, or in the website it goes into your SIM balance or your mobile wallet, and approves the loan. And the loan's approved. If you have a mobile wallet, it pushes it into the mobile wallet. Take it out from any of the agents that that particular person has partnered with. Or if you don't have a mobile wallet, in 5 minutes the mobile wallet is open. Now, understand the implication of this. If you apply for a credit card right now, or an auto loan, or any of the consumer banking products, best case scenario, you're talking about 17 days. Best case. Paperwork involved, salary statements involved, utility bills involved. We are talking about digital. Digital means minutes. So I'm talking about possibly a 15-minute process, maybe 20-minute process by more than one provider, and some are going to be even less than this. From the time you download the app to money in your hand at 90,000 agents as opposed to a specific branch. Now that's what I'm talking about when you're talking about digital. Exponential change in the delivery time frame, exponential change in the service. So I see certainly credit or nano credit after microfinance in a digital format being provided by 3 or 4 players by the first quarter of next year. And obviously, the 2 large telcos are going to lead this because they have the information about mobile wallets as well as SIM balance. But what's interesting is, what's happening around the world is, regulations are coming out where the customer can force a large bank, a large telco, a large insurance company to disclose his or her data to a provider of their choice. So this advantage that these large entities have is just a matter of time before that happens in Pakistan as well. And I would tell my telephone company or my bank or my insurance company to share my personal data with my fintech company because I'm getting a better deal out of them. So, it's a matter of time where this field becomes more even.
It's almost like you're looking at my notes. because we are exactly working on the 1-minute loan at the moment. We're about to launch a pilot, inshallah. And our investment has been in setting up a data structure within the bank. One of the first investments that we did as part of SimSim's launch was actually into an enterprise data warehouse. And then building a crack team of data scientists who are now analyzing the 85,000 accounts that we've got at the moment to figure out the patterns, the segmentation within the customers, to figure out what their spending patterns and also their credit score could be. So I think I'm glad to hear that you've brought up those points as potential future of fintech and the financial services industry, because as well. But in the same vein, what do you think could be a threat to fintechs?
Well, clearly, you know, I think the regulatory capital requirement is a threat. A young, you know, student coming out, having a great mobile app for payments, can't do it. It's a 2 million minimum capital requirement. I mean, that's, for few of them may be able to get funding because our entrepreneurial funding system is also in its infancy. We've got maybe 5 VCs, handful of angel investors, 2 PE firms. So we obviously don't have that ecosystem worked out where a young person with an app, which is a killer app, can immediately find funding for what they have. But coming back to the developments, you know, the second development I see is the use of digital cash across Pakistan. Now, if you keep this in mind, we've got 23 to 24 million mobile accounts, and we have this 1-minute mobile account. But the active mobile accounts, if I minus top-ups, it's probably about 15, 20% at best. So people have mobile accounts, but they're not using them because the use case is limited. I see the introduction of maybe, I think, a couple of 100,000 merchants where you can actually use digital cash. So there was the 1-minute account. The second thing was I called the 6 kinu purchase. You should be able to go to a thela wala and buy 6 kinus. I would say 6 cigarettes, but you know, I'll get banned from the house, so I'll stick to kinus. And whether it's the use of QR code, whether it's tap and pay, the people are looking at business models, because right now merchant acquisition in Pakistan is a loss-making proposition. All 4 banks who are into merchant acquisition lose money. But we've got to figure out a business case. And I know there are more than one firms working this, including yours, whereby rapidly, where the places where you actually go to remit money, you'll be able to use digital money as well. Yes. You know, we still have a country which is based on 99% cash. We have 3 trillion rupees floating out in the system. That's never coming into the system. And India is down to 60%, you know, down from, you know, high 80s. Obviously, demonetization was one of the reasons. Paytm took advantage of that. But I see more and more people starting to use digital cash as the opportunity for them, other than online, you know, purchases, physical purchases become available. Then you see balances in these wallets, and you see part of the 3 trillion rupees coming back in the banking system. So that's the second trend I see, that this merchant acquisition, you know, which is stagnated at 30, 35,000. Merchant by, I mean, where you can use a debit card or a credit card or digital cash, is going to explode, and people will figure out models how to do this. I see the use of machine learning, data science increasingly. Now, we have banks, we have insurance companies, even telcos, you know, looking at this, sitting on a very rich vein of data, but not optimizing it. Every company I've been to, honestly, if I ask them for a customer segmentation, the segmentation is very basic. Now, some FMC companies may have a higher segmentation, but banks typically have male, female, Karachi, Lahore, self-employed, employed. They don't have loss norms by segmentation. They don't have customer acquisition cost by segmentation. They don't have profitability by segmentation. So segmentation drives your acquisition. Very honestly, we still don't know. If I ask most company CEOs, if I ask them what's your customer cost of acquisition and what's your lifetime revenue of this customer, we don't know. We haven't got to that stage. Fintechs know this because fintechs work on unit cost basis. They have to understand this proposition from day one. And that's why when they get scale, and we've got like, I think I was doing an analysis, at least, I mean, it's early days, but we've got at least 8 to 10 success stories where you have more than 1 million apps, which are Pakistan-based, 1 million users using that, which is a very good start. And I'm not talking about just fintech, but non-fintech apps as well.
Absolutely. And we hope to be one of those few million within a few years as well. I think one of the points that you discussed is so relevant to our business model as well, because you talked about the power of the QR code and how merchants can be brought on board at a margin of the cost that it was with the traditional POS systems. One of the additional steps that we've taken is that we've taken the transaction fee out of the equation, and we've decided to make transactions absolutely free, and which means zero MDR. Now, this is a break from conventional banking norms because you have established businesses, huge revenue streams, which bank precisely on these transactions to generate revenue. It's a brave step to take, I think. As P&L head, it's one of the things that keeps me up at night. But I think that the philosophy that we follow is that you have to remove friction from the entry points into the digital economy. And once you've brought a customer on board and you have this digital ecosystem, then you get that money to stay within your ecosystem if you remove that friction point from within. And we have started to see within our own customer base, with our data, we have started to see these behaviors emerge where now people are preferring to pay through SimSim with the merchants. And the merchants, it creates a pull for the merchants as well. Nadeem Saab, what would you say, what can conventional banks with their model do if they were to try to respond to the fintech threat to their conventional model? What would you advise them? Or can they do anything at all at this point?
Absolutely they can. I mean, first of all, the guys who are smart are going to open up their APIs to fintechs because they're going to embrace this revolution. You can't fight it. It's just a matter of time where you're required to give up that information. So the market leaders are going to encourage fintechs to work with them, open sandboxes, create opportunities for fintechs to come work with them directly so they ride off the brain that the fintechs are bringing to them. Secondly, obviously, this thing about digital banking, central bank is looking at a regulation for creating a so-called digital bank. Commercial banks are very excited about that. But the point is, digital banking is not about having a front-end app that allows you access. It's the back-end change in processing that's going to give that digital experience. You can have a great app, but if your back-end is going to take the same 17 days to process that application, you really don't have a digital offering. Most digital banks in the world lead with payments, but we are looking over here potentially leading with credit. I think that's going to be, I think most commercial banks can get into nano credit, for example. They have the capital to sustain that. They can certainly get into payments. We don't have payment interoperability to the extent that we need it right now. Some regulations came out with the PTA, but they weren't embraced by the industry. So we still have, if you want to send money from one mobile wallet to another mobile wallet, you have to go to the conventional IBFT system, go into the bank, make an IBFT. So that's a convoluted way of sending money. I think commercial banks can be a great catalyst. They need to embrace fintechs. I would say if I was a commercial bank, I would invest in fintech companies and make sure that they're within the tent as opposed to outside the tent gnawing away at my profits.
No, that's a great point, and I think it is serving as a wake-up call, I believe, to a lot of the big banks right now. This happens to be the third consecutive industry that I'm a part of, which has been massively disrupted in the last 8 to 9 years. There was the telecom industry, where the revenue model has completely shifted. And then I was in Africa looking at microinsurance, and so the insurance industry is being upended very quickly by technology. Just to give you an idea of the scale, we managed to reach, with the organization I was heading in Africa, 8 million Africans with microinsurance products using telco as a channel in 11 countries. And now we hope to do a bit of the same, and so now you've got the banking industry being on the verge of a massive disruption. The challenge with disruption is always that, it comes out of the blue. The grounds are there, but you don't see it till it's right in front of your face. And by that time, for some of the bigger giants, it's already a bit too late to start changing. Looking at the time, I'm also going to, I think with your permission, Nadeem Saab, also open the floor to questions if there are any, and we'll continue the conversation. If there are any questions, just please raise your hand.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Najam. I'm from IBA Karachi. I have a question about the technology that we use to pay. And there was a technology, and there is a technology called NFC. Telenor started distributing these NFC stickers a couple of years ago. But I think for some reason they stopped doing it. So I'm interested in knowing why they stopped it. Was it because of the lack of infrastructure, or was it because people are not ready for that technology yet? Thank you.
Yeah, I recall starting a pilot, very excited about NFC technology because the technology works, but we didn't get the uptake that we were looking for. And since that time, QR code has also come in, so there's been a pause to see which technology to use. Clearly, 35,000 rupees POS machines are not the answer. So the industry is paused to see, and probably the way to go is more QR codes and a combination of tap and pay and NFC.
So, Nadeem Saab, if I may follow up with a question. One of my favorite writers, Yuval Hariri, wrote this brilliant book called Sapiens. And in that book, he says that the greatest myth that man ever created is money. It's a complete myth. We only believe in it when we believe as a collective. If even one of us or two of us stops believing in it, you pull out of the system. Which means that there is huge potential for reimagining that ecosystem of value exchange. Nadeem Saab, this is a bit of I don't know if it's a bit of a philosophical question, but if there were a shift in our culture as a country that you could envision, that would take us towards this digital age and cross the trust divide as well, and the digital divide that exists, what do you think could be that?
Honestly, it's going to be a challenge. While we're going to have 80 million people with smartphones and 95% GSM coverage of Pakistan by 2020, we are a cash-based society. And it's going to take us a fair amount of time from getting away from cash. And, but it can be done. We've seen what happened in India. It's a very painful demonetization. I'm not suggesting we do that, but it can be done. Cash is the most expensive way, of carrying out transactions by far. But it's what it's been ingrained in us. And having a 99% coverage in all of retail using cash as opposed to digital or credit, one, it's a huge number to come down from, but it's something that's ingrained. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I think it's going to be a challenge. Certainly. And coming back to your earlier question, very honestly, I don't see commercial banks in Pakistan disappearing. As long as the government has a deficit between its expenses and taxes, it's going to borrow from people. It doesn't borrow directly, it borrows through commercial banks. And this is going to remain for a very long time. What may happen is the spread may come down. And since the bulk of the profits of commercial banks come from this activity, all fintechs can do is create large customer bases outside what the banks do, but they're going to continue to make money. So I don't see them being either that worried or dislodged, because they're going to be there for a long time as a result of the local economic scenario that we have, of the imbalance between taxes, and expenditures. But clearly, there's momentum. If somebody said 5 years ago that one institution would move 6% of Pakistan's GDP, I'd say not possible. If you would say that 30, 35, 40 million of transactions would be done on a digital basis, as opposed to the physical hawala, hundi, post office, I'd say, that would be a major challenge, but it's happening. If we find out that, in 5 years from now, the commercial bank industry has only 2 million customers, but the nano credit industry has 30 million, lending customers, very possible. That's revolutionary in Pakistan, access to credit. So, things are happening, but it would be a much better acceleration if, we had, other than regulations, the other things I talked about that enabled digital intercommerce to take place.
Absolutely, and I think there's also a lot of room now for brave leadership, and I think bravery is perhaps an underused word in corporate in the corporate world. But I mean, with my own experience and looking at pioneers such as Nadeem Saab, I think bravery is one of the key elements of the leadership you need in this space, because what you're actively doing is cannibalizing your own business, and especially if banks and commercial banks head down this route. The results are uncertain. We don't know. There are lots of ideas. There are lots of pilots which are going on. We want to do digital lending, but then we look at Kenya and we see M-Shwari. But okay, there's a question over there. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So the question, I have two questions actually, and thank you for this very engaging session. I believe it's very true to the topic. So Toril, first of all, I just want to ask you, first question is that, what's the business model for fintech? Because I see this as a disruptive technology. It's a new area. We are here talking about how it can disrupt conventional banking. Conventional banking works on spread. So I just want to understand, what's the business model like? Is it sustainable? Because you talked about no transaction costs. The merchant acquisition cost is already a damper, it's a pain point. So where's the money? So that's my question one. And for Nadeem Saab, my question is, you talk about partnering with commercial banks and you talk about all of these things. Are there any concerns related to privacy? People have been traditionally, and even for good reasons, sort of very secretive about their financial terms. I mean, do you think the consumer is ready for their commercial banks to partner in this way?
So, yeah, I'll take the first question regarding the business model. So one of the very important things, and this is when I talked about the need to reimagine, is that you look at your conventional model and you say, okay, how can I make this a win-win situation for not just the bank, but the fintech and also the consumer? We believe in zero transaction fee because we feel that it's really more of a friction element than actually a proper revenue stream for us. Where could we look at? So what we want to do, what we envision is a platform, a digital platform where we are able to bring on customers and have enough use cases for them to convince them to retain their money in those wallets with us. So one clear revenue stream, of course, becomes float. So the deposit that you have with you. And that's only going to happen when you are able to complete all the touch points within the ecosystem for your customers. So they see the value in keeping money with you. The other, as Nadeem Saab pointed out, is of course lending. And there's a huge gap that we see, especially when you go to the middle tier and below. It's virtually an unserved market right now. Underserved is probably being generous. So we see that if we are able to crack the code using data and algorithms that we're developing in-house, if we're able to crack this lending piece, I think that all the rest of the revenue really becomes, revenue streams such as transaction fee become, pocket change by comparison.
Just to follow up on that, so do you see any collaborations with any other industries where you think this could take the industry forward, across industry?
Absolutely, and so we don't really try to introduce ourselves as a banking platform. What we say is we're a lifestyle application. And I think that, more and more you will see fintechs diversifying into other avenues of lifestyles as well. We want to enable a lifestyle, not necessarily being seen just as a payment platform. So yes, collaboration with other industries is very, very much possible. In fact, we are actively working on that right now.
So I'm going to disagree with my young friend a bit. I think zero MDR is going to be a challenge. Okay. So remains to be seen how that works out. There's another company which is charging 1% MDR instead of the 1.5, 1.75. I'm not saying which is right, but I think zero MDR working on float is going to be a challenge. But I hope they're successful because we need that large scale we're talking about. When I was talking about lending and collaboration with bank, two things first of all. The nano credit I was talking about was based on non-credit information. So you don't need to go to a bank. I'm just getting data off your phone or getting data of your SIM balance, how your SIM is being used. But coming back to specifically, let's say if you want to collaborate with banks, theoretically, if I was a data analytics company, I came up with the app, I could work with the bank, park my loans over there, and be the front end. So that's one area of collaboration with the bank who has excess liquidity and a balance sheet. While I'm a startup, I've got a great app which can do data analytics, but I don't have the balance sheet. My minimum capital requirement for getting MFI license is $500,000. Next step is $10 million for MFB. Okay, so those are big numbers for somebody just starting off, out of university with smart data scientist. But customer privacy is a very important issue. And I think we haven't given it its due consideration. But you've got to look at it in the total perspective. Everybody here has WhatsApp, Facebook. You've already given everything away. Okay? If you read the terms of that agreement, you've already signed data that you own onto these people. There's no such thing as a free lunch. All these free apps, the contract really is they get data from you. Okay? So everything in your phone is available to all these global players. That's why there's no cost of having any of these apps. But working with banks, I think it's very important that even for the non-financial data, that customer privacy issues are observed. There are mediations available in case of infractions, so customers feel protected. And I think there's very little being done on the non-financial side, and I think we need to come up with regulations. So if I'm as a data provider, having access to your phone, there must be some place if I abuse that trust that I can be held accountable, and that doesn't exist, very clearly right now. In the banking system, it does, but the real growth is not going to come from the customers in the banking system. 1.8 million lenders, 22 million, savers. That's not what the market is. The market is outside the commercial banking system.
Okay. Any other question? Yes. So this will probably be the last question of the session.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious, what do you guys think of Bitcoin and the future of Bitcoin in economies like Pakistan?
Okay, now, although you didn't say it, I want to divorce blockchain from cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. I see a huge future for blockchain in Pakistan. I expect next week some announcements to come out for the first use of blockchain in Pakistan for verifying university degrees. I see a nexus of Sharia-compliant lending with blockchain where time constraint and deal and offer need to be time-stamped. So I see a lot of use for blockchain. The central bank is very jaundiced about Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies right now, although globally some governments have recognized these cryptocurrencies as part of the reserve currency. We have always foreign currency reserve issues. There are such beautiful solutions available if we could use Bitcoin. For example, international remittance, which currently takes place through the traditional channels, uses close to 7% fees. 7 days could be done in 20% in 1 day. So it could be done in 20 minutes through Bitcoin. Okay? So, but the central bank won't see that incoming foreign currency as part of the reserves, and therefore they don't want to do it. So if you go to the central bank, they say this is an exchange not regulated by us. There are 3 Bitcoin exchanges, formally, and about 500 informally in Pakistan. If you go to the SECB, they say, we're not regulating. So there's nobody regulating exchanges where you can trade Bitcoin in Pakistan so far. So I see more use of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I don't see the central bank embracing it.
I guess we have to stop over there. Thank you very much, Nadeem Saab. That was a great session. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for taking
Thank you very much.
And the gentleman who is the lucky winner of the Apple Watch is Hassan Ahmed. Is Hassan Ahmed in here? Congratulations, Hassan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hassan. And let me invite Shaban Zaidi, the senior partner for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Pakistan, to step up to the stage and make our presentation to our panelists. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Please show your appreciation for the panel, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you once again. Right, our next...